The bullet tore through the canvas of the covered wagon just inches from where Lydia Brennan sat, hunched over her mother's sewing kit. And in that moment, she understood that everything her father had promised about their new life in Colorado Territory had been a beautiful lie. She pressed herself flat against the wagon floor, her hands instinctively going to the tight bun at the nape of her neck, as if keeping her hair properly pinned could somehow maintain order in a world that had just exploded into chaos. Outside, men were shouting, guns firing in rapid succession that made her ears ring. Her father's voice rose above the others, commanding the other settlers to form a defensive position, but there was a tremor in it she had never heard before. Lydia was 22 years old, and she had never once in her life let her hair down in front of anyone except her mother and sisters. It was 1876, and proper women kept themselves contained, controlled, pinned straight, and respectable. Her mother had taught her that much before the fever took her 3 winters ago in Kansas. Now it was just Lydia, her father Edmund, and her younger brother Thomas, heading west with a wagon train of 17 families, all seeking fortune or escape or redemption in the Rocky Mountains. The wagon lurched violently as someone climbed up front. Lydia grabbed for the water barrel to steady herself, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. Through the gap in the canvas, she caught glimpses of the attackers, faces painted, moving with practiced precision through the scattered wagons. This was not her first encounter with danger on the trail, but it was by far the worst. "Lydia!" Her father's voice sharp with fear. "Stay down!" She did not need to be told twice. The wooden floor was rough against her cheek, and she could smell the dust and flour and salt pork that had become the scent of their journey. 3 months they had been traveling from their small farm outside of Topeka, Kansas, following the promise of silver strikes in Colorado Territory. Her father had sold everything for this chance, convinced that they could build something better in the mountains, away from the memories that haunted every corner of their Kansas home. The gunfire intensified, then abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. Lydia held her breath, listening to the sounds of men moving between wagons, harsh voices giving orders in English. Not an Indian raid then. Outlaws. "Everybody out, nice and slow. Keep your hands where we can see them." Lydia's fingers trembled as she began to move toward the back of the wagon. Through the canvas, she could see families being herded into the center of the camp circle. Children cried, women clutched each other. The men stood with their hands raised, faces grim with the knowledge of how badly outgunned they were. She climbed down carefully, her long skirts catching on the wagon wheel. A rough hand grabbed her arm, steadying her but not gently. The outlaw who held her was young, maybe her own age, with cruel eyes and a smile that made her skin crawl. He looked her up and down in a way that made her want to disappear. "Well, now, what do we have here?" "Leave her alone." Her father's voice, tight with barely controlled anger. Edmund Brennan was a thin man, worn down by years of hard farming and harder losses, but he had always protected his children with every fiber of his being. The outlaw leader emerged from between the wagons, a tall man with a scarred face and cold calculation in his eyes. He surveyed the captured settlers with the air of someone taking inventory of livestock. "Here is how this works, folks. You give us your valuables, your weapons, your horses, and we ride away. You make trouble, and we start shooting. Simple as that." Lydia watched as the outlaws moved through the group, taking watches, jewelry, money pouches. Her father's jaw was clenched so tight, she worried his teeth would crack. When they came to her, she handed over her mother's locket without a word, though it felt like cutting out a piece of her heart. The young outlaw with the cruel eyes pocketed it with a wink that made her stomach turn. The robbery was methodical and efficient. These men had clearly done this before. They took the best horses, including the strong gelding her father had planned to use for hauling ore. They took guns and ammunition. They took supplies that would leave the wagon train dangerously short for the rest of the journey to Breckenridge. It was over in less than an hour. The outlaws rode away with their plunder, leaving the settlers in a state of shocked despair. The wagon master, a grizzled man named Patterson who had led trains through these mountains for 20 years, gathered everyone together as soon as the dust settled. "We are 4 days from Breckenridge," he said, his voice heavy. "Maybe 5 now without those horses. We have been hit hard, but we are alive, and that counts for something. We push on at first light." That night, Lydia lay in the wagon and listened to her father and brother talking in low voices outside. They had lost more than most. The money her father had carefully saved was gone. The tools Thomas needed for their planned mining operation were gone. They would arrive in Breckenridge with little more than the clothes on their backs and a wagon that needed repairs. She touched her hair, still perfectly pinned despite everything. Maintaining this one small piece of propriety felt important, like a thread connecting her to the civilized world they had left behind. Out here in the wilderness, such things mattered even more. They were proof that you had not given up, that you still believed in order and decency and the way things were supposed to be. Sleep came fitfully, and dawn arrived too soon. The wagon train moved slowly, hampered by the loss of horses and the general mood of defeat that hung over everyone. The trail climbed steadily into the mountains, the air growing thinner and colder. Lydia could see snow on the distant peaks, even though it was only September. 2 days after the robbery, Thomas shot a deer. It was good fortune they desperately needed, meat to supplement their dwindling supplies. Her father and brother dressed the kill while Lydia started a fire. Other families from the train came to trade for shares of the meat, and for the first time since the attack, there was something approaching normalcy in the camp. "You did well, son," Edmund told Thomas, gripping his shoulder. At 18, Thomas was growing into his father's tall frame, though he still had the gangly awkwardness of youth. The next morning, Thomas was gone. Lydia woke to find his bedroll empty, his rifle missing. Her father was already up, pacing beside the wagon with a look of barely contained panic. "He left a note," Edmund said, his voice hollow. "He went back to track those outlaws, to get our things back." "What?" Lydia felt the blood drain from her face. "He will get himself killed." "I know." Her father's hands shook as he held the scrap of paper. "Patterson says we cannot wait. The weather is turning, and we need to reach Breckenridge before the first real snow. He says Thomas made his choice. He is 18 years old. He does not understand what he is doing. He is 18 years old, which makes him a man by law, even if not by sense." Edmund looked at his daughter with eyes full of grief. "I have to go after him, Lydia." She understood immediately what he was not saying. If both of them went, she would be alone. If she went with him, they would have to abandon the wagon and everything they owned. And if they found Thomas, if they caught up to him and somehow survived confronting the outlaws, they would still be stranded in the wilderness, far from help. "The wagon train leaves in an hour," Patterson told them bluntly. "I'm sorry about your boy, but I've got 30 other families to think about. Winter comes early in these mountains." In the end, Edmund made the only choice he could. He gave Lydia what little money they had left hidden, pressed his pistol into her hands, and extracted a promise from Patterson to see her safely to Breckenridge. Then, he took one of their remaining horses and rode back the way they had come, following his son into almost certain death. Lydia watched him disappear into the pine forest, and she felt something inside her go very cold and still. She climbed back into the wagon, checked that her hair was properly pinned, and waited for the train to move forward. She did not cry. She could not afford to cry. If she started, she did not think she would ever stop. The wagon train reached the outskirts of Breckenridge 3 days later, on an afternoon when the sky was the hard, bright blue of autumn, and the wind carried the smell of snow. The town was bigger than Lydia had expected, built in a valley surrounded by mountain peaks that seemed to touch the clouds. Buildings lined a main street of churned mud, and she could see the frames of new construction going up on the hillsides. This was a town in the grip of silver fever, growing faster than anyone could plan or control. Patterson helped her find a boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Henley, a sharp-eyed widow who asked few questions and accepted the modest payment Lydia could offer. The room was small but clean, with a single window that looked out on the street. It was nothing like the home they had left in Kansas, but it would do. "What will you do now, miss?" Mrs. Henley asked as Lydia unpacked her few belongings. "Or find work," Lydia said simply. "Wait for my father and brother." She did not say what she was thinking, which was that she would probably be waiting forever. The mountains had swallowed her family whole, and she was alone in a town where she knew no one, with skills that were not particularly valuable in a mining camp. She could sew and cook and keep house, but so could most women. She had some schooling, enough to read and write well and do figures, but not enough to teach. The boarding house had 7 other residents, mostly minors who came and went at odd hours. Mrs. Henley ran a tight ship with strict rules about behavior and cleanliness. Lydia appreciated the order of it, the sense that some standards still applied even out here on the edge of civilization. She found work the next day at a dry goods store owned by a man named Horace Carter. He was in his 50s, with a round belly and a practical manner. He needed someone to help with inventory and customers, and Lydia's neat appearance and good manners won her the position. The pay was modest but steady. The work was not difficult, but it was long. The store opened early and closed late, serving miners and settlers and the growing population of people who made their living off the mining industry rather than in the mines themselves. Lydia learned to recognize the different types who came through the door. The hopeful young men with dreams of striking it rich. The hard-bitten veterans who had been prospecting for years with nothing to show for it. The businessmen in slightly better clothes, calculating how to extract wealth from the gold and silver without ever picking up a shovel themselves. She asked about her father and brother whenever she could, describing them to anyone who might have seen them. No one had. Men disappeared in these mountains all the time, Horace told her matter-of-factly. The wilderness did not give up its dead easily. 3 weeks passed. The aspen trees on the mountainsides turned gold, then lost their leaves entirely. The morning frost lasted longer each day. Lydia maintained her routines with rigid discipline. She woke early, pinned her hair carefully, ate a small breakfast at the boarding house, walked to the store, worked through the day, walked back, ate dinner, read by lamplight until her eyes hurt, then slept. She did not let herself think too much about what came next, about what she would do when winter truly set in, and her father still had not returned. On a cold October morning, a man came into the store who was different from anyone Lydia had seen in Breckenridge. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders so broad he had to turn slightly to fit through the doorway. His hair was dark brown and fell past his shoulders, tied back with a leather cord. His face was weathered and strong-featured, with a thick beard and eyes the color of pine forests. He wore buckskin clothing, heavily fringed and well-made, and moved with a kind of coiled grace that suggested strength held carefully in check. "Help you find something?" Horace called from where he was arranging canned goods. The man's voice was deep and surprisingly soft. "Need salt, flour, coffee, and ammunition if you have got it, .44 caliber." Lydia found herself gathering the items without being asked, her hands moving automatically even as something in her chest felt strange and tight. The man watched her work with an expression that was difficult to read, neither friendly nor unfriendly, just watchful. "You are new in town," he said as she wrapped the purchases. "I arrived 3 weeks ago," Lydia replied, keeping her eyes on her task. "With the Patterson train?" She looked up in surprise. "Yes. How did you know?" "I make it my business to know what happens in these mountains." He handed her money for the goods, his hands scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard at difficult things. "You came in alone." "That is unusual." There was something in his tone that made her trust him, or at least trust him more than she trusted most people in this town. "My father and brother went back to track the outlaws who robbed our train. I've not heard from them since." The man was quiet for a long moment. "How long ago?" "Nearly 4 weeks now." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he already suspected. "I'm sorry. The gang that has been hitting the wagon trains, they are not the type to leave witnesses." The words should have hurt, but Lydia had already come to the same conclusion herself. Hearing it said aloud was almost a relief. "Thank you for your honesty. What will you do?" "I have work here. I will manage." The man studied her with those deep forest eyes, and she had the strange sense that he could see more than she meant to show. "My name is William Irving," he said finally. "People call me Will. I have a cabin about an hour north of here, up in the high country. I come down for supplies once a month or so. If you need anything, if anyone gives you trouble, you can leave word with Horace and it will get to me. That is kind, but I do not need charity. Not offering charity, Miss Brennan, just letting you know you are not as alone as you might think." He left before she could ask how he knew her name, though she supposed it was not surprising. Breckenridge was small enough that newcomers were noticed and talked about. Still, the encounter left her feeling unsettled in a way she could not quite name. "That is Will Irving," Horace said after the door closed. "Best tracker and hunter in the territory. Lives up in the mountains by himself, brings down furs and game to trade. Decent man, if a bit rough around the edges. Indians and mountain men alike respect him." Which tells you something. Winter came to Breckenridge with sudden ferocity in mid-November. Snow fell for 3 days straight, piling up in the streets and on the roofs, transforming the town into something from a picture book. The cold was like nothing Lydia had experienced in Kansas, a deep biting chill that crept through walls and blankets and made her bones ache. The store stayed busy with people stocking up on supplies before the mountain passes became completely impassable. Lydia wore her heavy wool dress and a shawl, but she was still cold more often than not. At night in her boarding house room, she would pile on every blanket she owned and still shiver herself to sleep. On the first day of December, a Saturday, she was locking up the store for the evening when 3 men approached her on the darkening street. She recognized one of them as a miner who came into the store regularly, a man named Dalton who drank too much and always looked at her in ways that made her uncomfortable. "Evening, Miss Brennan," Dalton said, his words slightly slurred. "Awful cold out here. We were thinking you might want some company walking home." "No, thank you." Lydia kept her voice firm and started walking. The boarding house was only 3 blocks away. She could make it. The men followed. Dalton kept talking, his voice taking on an edge. "That is not very friendly. We are just trying to be neighborly. Pretty girl like you, all alone in town. You ought to be more appreciative of those who want to look after you." Lydia walked faster. One of the other men laughed, a sound that set her nerves jangling. The street was not quite empty, but the few people who were out kept their heads down and hurried on their own business. This was a rough town, and people did not interfere in things that were not their concern. She was half a block from the boarding house when Dalton grabbed her arm. "I'm talking to you." "Let go of me." Lydia tried to pull away, but his grip was strong and painful. "Maybe we should teach you some manners, show you how things work around here." The lady said to let go. The voice came from behind them, deep and calm and absolutely cold. Lydia twisted around to see William Irving standing in the middle of the street. He had materialized out of the snowy darkness like a spirit, and even in the dim light from the buildings, she could see the danger in his stance. Dalton's friends backed up immediately. Dalton himself was either too drunk or too stupid to recognize the threat. "This is none of your business, Irving. The girl and I are just talking." "She's not talking to you. She's trying to get away from you. That makes it my business." "You cannot come into town and tell people what to do. You are just a damn savage, living up in the mountains like an animal." William moved so fast Lydia barely saw it. One moment he was 10 feet away, the next he had Dalton by the throat, lifting him slightly off the ground. "You are going to let go of her arm," William said quietly. "Then you are going to apologize. Then you and your friends are going to go sleep off whatever rotgut you have been drinking. And if I ever see you bother this woman again, I will break every bone in your hand. Do you understand?" Dalton's face was turning purple. He released Lydia's arm and scrabbled at William's wrist. "I understand." William let him drop. Dalton and his friends stumbled away into the darkness, coughing and cursing, but not looking back. Lydia stood frozen, her heart racing, her arm throbbing where Dalton had gripped it. "Are you hurt?" William asked, his voice gentling. "I do not think so, just frightened." "Come on, I will walk you home." They walked in silence for a moment. Lydia was acutely aware of his presence beside her, the solid strength of him, the way people moved out of his path even though he was not doing anything threatening. She felt safer than she had since arriving in Breckenridge, which was strange considering she barely knew this man. "Thank you," she said as they reached the boarding house. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there." "I know what would have happened. That is why I was there." "What do you mean?" "I have been keeping an eye on you, Miss Brennan. This is not an easy town for a woman alone. Men like Dalton, they see someone without protection, and they think it means they can do what they want." Lydia should have been offended at the idea of being watched, but instead she felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "I did not ask you to do that." "No, you did not. But your father asked me to look after you before he left, and I gave him my word." She stared at him. "What? When did you talk to my father?" "The day he rode out after your brother. He came to my cabin first, asked if I had seen any sign of the outlaw gang. I told him what I knew, which was not much. He said he knew it was probably a fool's errand, but he had to try. Asked me to check on you from time to time, make sure you were managing all right. Tears stung Lydia's eyes suddenly, the first real tears she had let herself feel since that morning she woke to find Thomas gone. He is dead, isn't he? Both of them. William did not try to soften it. Probably. I am sorry. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. After a moment, she found her voice again. Why are you just telling me this now? Because you did not need anyone else's grief before. You had enough of your own, and because I figured you would not welcome a stranger trying to involve himself in your life. He paused. But men like Dalton are not going to leave you alone just because you want them to. You need someone watching your back, whether you like it or not. I can take care of myself. I'm sure you can, under normal circumstances. But these are not normal circumstances. William studied her face in the lamplight spilling from the boarding house windows. I am not trying to insult you, Miss Brennan. I am trying to keep you alive and unhurt. Lydia wrapped her shawl tighter around herself, suddenly aware of how cold she was, how tired, how completely alone in the world. What do you want from me? Nothing. I gave your father my word, and I keep my promises. He tipped his head slightly. Get inside before you freeze. I will be around. He walked away into the snowy darkness before she could respond, his tall form disappearing between the buildings like he had never been there at all. Lydia went inside, climbed the stairs to her small room, and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time, her fingers touching the pins in her hair without removing them. The next week, William Irving began appearing in town more regularly. Lydia would see him standing across the street from the dry goods store or leaning against a post near the boarding house when she walked home in the evening. He never approached her, never spoke to her, just maintained his watchful presence. Other people noticed, too. The rough element in town, the men who had previously eyed Lydia with speculation and hunger, began keeping their distance. You have got yourself a guardian angel, Horace observed one afternoon, though Will Irving is about the most unlikely angel I have ever seen. I did not ask for his protection. Does not matter much whether you asked or not. He is a man of his word, and apparently he gave someone his word about you. Horace looked at her shrewdly. You could do worse, you know. Will is different from most men around here. He's not chasing silver or trying to get rich. He lives the way he wants, answers to nobody. But he is honest and decent, which counts for a lot. Lydia did not know how to respond to that. She focused on her work, measuring out nails for a customer, and tried not to think about the mountain man who had appointed himself her protector. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. The boarding house had a small party, with Mrs. Henley serving ham and potatoes and a precious apple pie made with preserved fruit. Lydia contributed what she could and tried to smile and be sociable, but her heart was not in it. This was supposed to be their first Christmas in their new life, her father and brother and her, building something together. Instead, she was alone, and they were probably dead and frozen somewhere in the mountains. On New Year's Day, 1877, William Irving knocked on the door of the boarding house and asked Mrs. Henley if he could speak with Miss Brennan. The widow looked him over with a critical eye, but she must have seen something she approved of, because she went upstairs and fetched Lydia without any of her usual stern questions about propriety. Lydia came down to find William standing in the front parlor, looking distinctly uncomfortable in the feminine space with its flowered wallpaper and delicate furniture. He had cleaned up, his hair freshly washed and his beard trimmed, wearing what looked like his best clothes, though they were still buckskin and homespun rather than anything fancy. Miss Brennan, he said formally, I was wondering if you might take a walk with me. There is something I would like to discuss. Mrs. Henley looked between them and made a small, satisfied sound. You two stay on the main streets where people can see you. Back in an hour, Miss Brennan. The cold outside was intense, the kind that made the inside of your nose freeze when you breathed. Lydia pulled her shawl tight and walked beside William through the snowy streets. The town was quiet on the holiday, most people inside keeping warm. I have been thinking about your situation, William said after a few moments. Working at the dry goods store, living in a boarding house, that is fine for now. But when spring comes, the prospectors will flood back into these mountains, and Breckenridge is going to get rougher before it gets better. A woman alone, it is not safe. I do not have many choices, Lydia said quietly. You have more choices than you think. He stopped walking and turned to face her. I have a proposition for you, and I want you to listen to the whole thing before you decide I am crazy. I live up in the mountains in a cabin I built myself. It is solid and weatherproof, with a good fireplace and a spring nearby for water. I make a decent living trading furs and meat, enough to support 2 people comfortably. What I do not have is someone to share the work and the life with. Lydia's heart started beating faster. What are you saying? I'm saying I would like you to consider marrying me. She stared at him, absolutely certain she had misunderstood. You want to marry me? You barely know me. I know enough. You are hardworking and brave. You do not complain or give up when things get hard. You are honest and decent. Those are the things that matter. William's green eyes were steady on hers. I am not going to pretend this is some grand romance. I am not good with pretty words, and I am not the kind of man who fits into town society. But I can promise you safety and respect and a home that is yours as much as mine. I will never raise a hand to you or speak cruel words. What is mine will be yours. I am asking you to think about it, that is all. Why? Lydia whispered. Why would you want to tie yourself to me? You do not owe my father anything beyond keeping an eye on me. William was quiet for a long moment, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air. Because I have been alone in those mountains for 8 years now, and I am tired of it. Because when I look at you, I see someone who understands what it means to lose everything and keep going anyway. Because I think we could build something good together, if you are willing to try. I do not know anything about living in the wilderness. I am a farmer's daughter from Kansas. I can cook and sew and keep house. But I do not know the first thing about mountain living. You can learn. I will teach you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his much larger one. I am not asking you to decide right now. Think about it. But spring comes fast up here, and once the pass is open, this town is going to change. I would like you to be safe before that happens. Lydia looked down at their joined hands. His was warm despite the cold, rough with calluses and old scars. She thought about her small room at the boarding house, about the long days in the store, about the looks from men like Dalton. She thought about what the rest of her life might look like if she stayed on this path, alone in a mining town that was only going to get rougher. I will think about it, she said finally. He nodded and released her hand. That's all I ask. They walked back to the boarding house in silence. At the door, William tipped his head to her and said, I will be in town next week. You can give me your answer then, or tell me you need more time. Either way is fine. Lydia went up to her room and sat by the window, looking out at the snow-covered mountains. Marriage to a virtual stranger, moving to an isolated cabin far from other people, a completely different life from anything she had imagined. But then, nothing had turned out the way she imagined. Her mother was dead. Her father and brother were dead. The farm in Kansas was gone, sold to finance a dream that had turned to dust. She had no family left, no ties to anywhere or anyone. William Irving was offering her something real and solid, even if it was not wrapped in romance and courtship. He was offering partnership, safety, a home. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was more than most people got. Over the next week, Lydia caught herself watching for William around town, even though she knew he had returned to his mountain cabin. She found herself thinking about what he had said, turning his proposal over in her mind from every angle. She asked Horace carefully worded questions about William's reputation, about how he was known in the community. Will Irving is about as solid as they come, Horace told her. He has lived in these mountains since right after the war. Some say he came out here to forget something, but he does not talk about his past. What matters is who he is now. He is fair in his dealings, he keeps his word, and he does not cause trouble. The Indians respect him, which is saying something. If he has offered you marriage, Miss Brennan, you should consider it seriously. Mrs. Henley had opinions too, once she figured out what was going on. That William Irving is a good man, but he is not an easy man, she said, while Lydia was helping with the dinner dishes. He has been alone too long. He will have his ways set, and you will have yours. Mountain living is hard on women. The isolation, the cold, the constant work. You need to be sure you know what you are getting into. What would you do in my position? Lydia asked. The older woman was quiet for a moment, her hands stilling in the dishwater. "I would marry him," she said finally. "Not because I think it will be easy or perfect, but because a good man who offers you respect and partnership is a rare thing, and you should not turn that down lightly. This town will eat you alive if you stay here alone. At least up in the mountains, you would have a home and someone to stand with you." William returned to town exactly a week later, just as he said he would. Lydia saw him from the store window, and her heart did a strange flutter in her chest. She finished helping her customer, then told Horace she needed a break. He waved her off with a knowing look. She found William outside, leaning against the hitching post, his breath clouding in the cold January air. When he saw her, he straightened up, and she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Hello, Miss Brennan." "Hello?" Lydia folded her hands in front of her, a gesture of composure that belied the nerves jumping in her stomach. "I have thought about your proposal." "And?" "I have questions first, practical ones." Relief flickered across his weathered face. That she had questions meant she was taking it seriously. "Ask anything you want." "Your cabin, how big is it?" "2 rooms, main room with the fireplace for cooking and living, and a smaller bedroom. I will build another room onto it before summer if you want more space." "Is there a church nearby, a town?" "Breckenridge is the closest town, about an hour on foot, less on horseback. There is no church close by, but we could come down here for services if that is important to you. There are a few other cabins scattered through the high country, trappers and prospectors mostly. We would not be completely isolated, but we would be alone most of the time." "What would my work be?" "Cooking, preserving food, tending the garden in summer, helping with the furs in winter. I would teach you to shoot and fish. You would not be idle, but you would not be worked to death either. I do not expect you to do things you are not capable of learning." Lydia took a breath. "If I say yes, and then find I cannot bear it, that it is too hard or too lonely, what happens then?" William met her eyes steadily. "Then I bring you back to town, help you find a place to stay, and we go our separate ways. I would not force you to stay in a situation that makes you miserable, but I will ask that you give it a real try first, at least through the summer. Mountain living looks different in different seasons." "Would you expect me to share your bed immediately?" A faint color rose in his bearded cheeks. "No. We would marry legal and proper, but I will not push you into intimacy before you are ready. When and if that happens, it will be your choice as much as mine." Lydia studied him, this big, quiet mountain man who had appointed himself her protector and now wanted to be her husband. She thought about everything she had lost and everything she stood to lose if she stayed on her current path. She thought about the alternative futures stretching out before her, none of them particularly appealing except this one. "All right," she said quietly. "I will marry you." William's whole face changed, a smile breaking through that transformed him from intimidating to almost handsome. "You mean it?" "I mean it. But I have conditions. I want a real marriage, not just an arrangement. I want us to try to build something together, to be partners in truth, and I want honesty between us, always." "You have my word on all of that." He reached out and took her hand, squeezing gently. "We will make this work, Lydia. I promise you that." They were married 3 days later by a circuit preacher who happened to be passing through Breckenridge. The ceremony was simple, held in Mrs. Henley's parlor, with Horace and Mrs. Henley serving as witnesses. Lydia wore her best dress, dark blue wool with a white collar, and William wore clean buckskins and a shirt that looked suspiciously new. He had trimmed his beard again and tied his long hair back neatly. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, William kissed her gently on the forehead, a gesture that was more sweet than passionate, but felt right for what they were building together. Mrs. Henley cried and hugged Lydia fiercely. Horace shook William's hand and told him to take good care of his best employee. They spent one night in the boarding house, with William sleeping on the floor of Lydia's small room, insistent on keeping his promise not to rush her into anything. In the morning, they packed Lydia's few belongings onto William's horse and set out for the mountains. The trail climbed steadily north from Breckenridge, winding through thick pine forests and across frozen streams. The world was silent, except for the crunch of their footsteps in the snow and the occasional cry of a bird. Lydia walked beside William, leading the horse that carried their supplies. The cold was intense, but the sky was brilliantly blue, and the sun glinting off the snow was so bright it hurt to look at. After about an hour, they emerged from the forest into a clearing. Lydia stopped and caught her breath at the view. Mountains surrounded them on all sides, their peaks white against the sky. In the center of the clearing sat a log cabin, solid and well built, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. "That is home," William said, watching her face. "What do you think?" "It is beautiful," Lydia said honestly. "Isolated, but beautiful." He smiled. "Come on, let me show you inside." The cabin was better than she had expected. The main room was spacious, with a large fireplace, a table and chairs, shelves stocked with supplies, and a comfortable-looking area with chairs and furs for sitting. The bedroom was smaller but cozy, with a real bed piled with blankets and furs. Everything was clean and well-maintained. "You keep a good house," Lydia observed. "I do my best, but I will admit it will be nice to have someone else to share the work." William set her bag down carefully. "I will sleep out here by the fire until you tell me otherwise. The bedroom is yours." Over the next weeks, they fell into a rhythm. William was right that there was plenty of work to do, but it was different from the work Lydia had done in Kansas or at the store. He taught her to split kindling properly, to bank the fire so it would last through the night, to identify animal tracks in the snow. She cooked their meals and mended their clothes and learned to scrape and stretch the furs he brought in from his trap lines. They talked while they worked, sharing stories of their lives before. William had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers. He had fought in the war on the Union side and come west afterward because he could not stand to stay in a place full of ghosts. He had been married once before, briefly, to a girl he knew in his youth. She had died of cholera within a year of their wedding, and he had taken it hard. "I thought I was done with that part of life," he admitted one evening as they sat by the fire. "Figured I would live up here alone until I got too old to manage, then maybe move back to civilization. But then your father showed up at my door, asking about outlaws, and something about the way he talked about you, his worry for you. It stuck with me. When I saw you in town that first time, you looked so determined and so lost at the same time. I wanted to help." "I'm glad you did," Lydia said. She was working on patching one of his shirts, her needle flashing in the firelight. "I do not think I realized how alone I was until you offered me something different." As January turned to February, the cold deepened, but the days grew incrementally longer. William took Lydia out to check his trap lines, teaching her to move quietly through the forest, to read the landscape. She was a quick learner, and he told her so, which made warmth spread through her chest in a way that had nothing to do with physical heat. One evening in late February, after a day spent sawing wood and hauling water, they were sitting by the fire when William said, "Your hair's always up. Do you ever let it down?" Lydia's hand went automatically to the tight bun at the nape of her neck. "Not in front of people. It is not proper. We are married. I am not people. It is a habit, I suppose. My mother taught me that a lady keeps herself neat and contained." William was quiet for a moment, his green eyes reflecting the firelight. "May I see it down? Just once?" Lydia felt her cheeks heat. It seemed like such a small thing, but it felt strangely intimate, more intimate than many other things they had shared. "I do not know. It is very long. I have not cut it since I was a child. Please, I would like to see." There was something in his voice, a gentleness mixed with genuine interest, that made her fingers move to the pins in her hair almost without conscious thought. She removed them one by one, setting them carefully on the table beside her. As the last pin came free, her hair tumbled down her back in a heavy dark brown wave, falling past her waist. William made a sound like he had been struck. "Lord have mercy, Lydia, that is beautiful. Why do you keep it hidden?" "Because it is proper," she said again, but her voice was uncertain now. "May I touch it?" She nodded, unable to speak. William moved closer, his large hands reaching out to lift a strand of her hair carefully, as if it were something precious and fragile. His fingers combed through it gently, working out a small tangle. "It is so soft," he murmured, "like silk. Have you really never worn it down outside?" "Never, not since I was old enough to pin it up." "That's a shame. It is too beautiful to hide." He continued stroking her hair with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his size and strength. "You should wear it down sometimes here with me. There is no one to see, no one to judge what is proper or not." Lydia felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of control and propriety that had been wound there for as long as she could remember. "Maybe I will," she whispered. William's hand moved from her hair to her cheek, cupping it gently. "May I kiss you properly? I've been wanting to for weeks, but I did not want to push." "Yes," Lydia breathed, and then his mouth was on hers, warm and sure, and everything a kiss should be. They came together slowly that night, by firelight, with Lydia's hair spread out around them like a dark river. William was patient and tender, always checking that she was all right, that she wanted to continue. It was nothing like the clinical descriptions her mother had given her about wifely duties, and everything like something she had dreamed about in secret. Moments she barely admitted to herself. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs before the fireplace, Lydia's head on William's broad chest, his fingers still playing with her hair. I love you," he said quietly. "I know we came together for practical reasons, but somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Your strength and your kindness and your determination. You do not have to say it back if you are not ready, but I wanted you to know." Lydia lifted her head to look at him, this mountain man who had become her husband and her partner, and now, apparently, her love. "I think I've been falling in love with you too," she admitted. "I just did not recognize it for what it was. I thought I was supposed to feel like I did about the boys back in Kansas, that silly, fluttery feeling. But this is deeper. This feels like coming home." William smiled and pulled her closer, and they stayed that way until the fire burned low and the cold crept in, forcing them to move to the bedroom where they could pile the blankets high and keep each other warm through the mountain night. Spring came late to the high country, but when it arrived, it transformed everything. The snow melted in rushing torrents, feeding the streams and rivers. Wildflowers exploded across the meadows in brilliant colors. The aspen trees leafed out in that particular fresh green that only appeared for a few weeks. William and Lydia worked together to plant a garden near the cabin, turning the soil and planting seeds William had carefully saved from the previous year. Lydia had taken to wearing her hair loose around the cabin, though she still pinned it up when they went to town for supplies. William loved to see it down, and she loved that he loved it. It was a small intimacy between them, but it felt significant, like she was finally allowing herself to be fully seen. In May, a mountain man named John Pierce stopped at their cabin while traveling through. He was an old friend of William's, a grizzled veteran of the fur trade who had stories that kept them entertained through a long evening. Before he left the next morning, he mentioned that he had heard something in Breckenridge that might interest them. "Two men came into town a few weeks back," Pierce said. "A father and son looking more dead than alive. They had been tracking the outlaw gang that has been hitting the wagon trains, caught up with them too, though it cost them dearly. The son took a bullet in the shoulder, and the father was half frozen. But they survived." Lydia's heart stopped. "What were their names?" "Brennan, I think. Edmund and Thomas Brennan. They are still in town, recovering. Asked if anyone knew what had happened to a girl named Lydia." William was on his feet immediately. "We are going to Breckenridge, now." They made the journey in record time, Lydia riding behind William on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist and her heart pounding with hope and fear and disbelief. It was not possible. She had mourned them. She had accepted their deaths. But if there was even a chance... They found Edmund and Thomas in a room above the saloon, being tended by the local doctor's wife. Both men looked haggard and worn, thinner than Lydia remembered, but very much alive. When Edmund saw her, he started crying, reaching out with shaking hands. "Lydia, dear God, Lydia, I thought I would never see you again." She ran to him, wrapping her arms around her father carefully, aware of how fragile he seemed. "I thought you were dead, both of you." "Nearly were," Thomas said from the other bed. His left arm was in a sling, and there were healing scars on his face, but his eyes were bright. "We tracked those outlaws for 3 weeks. Caught up with them in a canyon. There was a fight. I got shot, Father got knocked into a half-frozen river, but we got our things back, or most of them, and we made sure those bastards will not be robbing any more wagon trains." "What happened to them?" William asked quietly. "The law caught up with them after we weakened them considerably," Edmund said. "They are in jail in Denver, awaiting trial. We nearly died a dozen times over the winter, but we survived, and now we are here, And you are here, and I cannot believe how lucky we are." Lydia introduced William, explaining their marriage. Edmund looked William over carefully, the way a father does when evaluating the man his daughter has chosen. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he extended his hand. "You gave her a home and protection when she needed it. That makes you a good man in my book." They stayed in Breckenridge for a week while Edmund and Thomas continued recovering. William used the time to arrange for the sale of some of his furs, and Lydia helped her father and brother plan their next steps. They had retrieved enough of their supplies and money to make another attempt at mining, but Edmund was frank about his doubts. "I am not sure I have the strength for it anymore," he admitted to Lydia one afternoon. "The winter took something out of me, and Thomas is still healing. I'm thinking maybe we should settle in town, find work that's less likely to kill us." "There is another option," Lydia said carefully. "William's cabin is large, and there's plenty of land around it. We could build another cabin nearby, start a small settlement. William needs help with his trap lines and hunting. Thomas is young and strong, or will be again once he heals fully. You could work together." Edmund looked at his daughter shrewdly. "You are happy up there. With him?" "I'm very happy. Happier than I have been since Mother died. William is a good man, Father. He takes care of me, and I take care of him. We have built something real together." "Then we will think on it," Edmund said, "though I will admit the idea of having my family close again is appealing." In the end, that was what they decided. Thomas and Edmund bought a plot of land about a half-mile from William and Lydia's cabin, and William helped them build a sturdy 2-room house before summer was fully underway. It was hard work, but good work, the kind that left you tired but satisfied at the end of the day. The small settlement they created became a haven for travelers and trappers passing through the high country. Lydia became known for her cooking and her hospitality, always willing to feed a hungry man or tend to minor injuries. Edmund settled into a kind of semi-retirement, helping out where he could, but mostly just enjoying being alive after coming so close to death. Thomas thrived in the mountain life, working alongside William and learning the skills of tracking and trapping. In the spring of 1878, Lydia gave birth to their first child, a boy they named Edmund William after both their fathers. William was beside himself with joy and worry, hovering over Lydia like a mother hen until she laughingly shooed him away. The birth was hard but not dangerous, and the baby was healthy and loud. "He has your strength," William told Lydia as she nursed their son. "Look at how he grips my finger. He is going to be a fighter." "I hope he has your kindness," Lydia replied, touching William's bearded cheek. "That is more important than strength." 2 years later, they had a daughter, Anne Margaret, named after both their mothers. She was dark-haired and green-eyed like her father, with a temperament that was somehow both fierce and gentle. Edmund Sr. doted on his grandchildren, and Thomas became the favorite uncle, always willing to play and tell stories. Life in the high country was hard but good. The winters were brutal, the work was constant, and there were dangers from wild animals, accidents, and the occasional difficult person passing through. But there was also beauty beyond measure, and freedom, and the deep satisfaction of building something lasting with your own hands. Lydia continued to wear her hair down around the cabin, though she still pinned it up when they went to town or had visitors. It remained a small intimacy between her and William, a symbol of how she had learned to let go of the rigid propriety she had once thought was essential. She had learned that there were more important things than following rules: loyalty, love, partnership, courage. On their 5th wedding anniversary in 1882, William took Lydia up to a high meadow above their cabin. The wildflowers were in full bloom, and the view stretched for miles in every direction. They sat together on a sun-warmed rock, her head on his shoulder, and watched their children playing in the flowers below, while Edmund and Thomas kept watch. "Do you ever regret it?" William asked. "Marrying me, coming up here, giving up the chance for a more civilized life?" Lydia turned to look at him, this man who had become everything to her. His hair was starting to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but he was still the strongest, most capable man she had ever known. More than that, he was kind and patient, and loved her with a devotion that never wavered. "Never," she said firmly. "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I thought I had lost everything. You taught me that I was stronger than I knew, that I could build a life in places I never imagined. You loved me when I was still learning how to love myself. How could I ever regret that? I love you, William said, as he said every day, as he would continue to say for the rest of their lives together. I loved you from the moment I saw you standing in that store, trying so hard to be brave when everything had fallen apart. I will love you until I am too old to remember my own name. I love you too, Lydia replied, and kissed him there in the high mountain meadow, with the sun warm on their faces and their children's laughter echoing off the peaks. They had 3 more children over the years, another boy and 2 more girls. The settlement around their cabin grew slowly, attracting other families looking for a simpler, quieter life. William and Thomas built a schoolhouse, and Lydia taught reading and writing to all the children in the area. Edmund Sr. lived to see all his grandchildren born, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, content and surrounded by family. Thomas eventually married a woman named Sarah, who came west with her parents in 1880. They built their own cabin on the other side of the meadow and had 4 children who grew up alongside William and Lydia's brood. The children ran wild through the mountains, learning to hunt and fish and trap, but also to read and write and do their sums. As the years passed, Breckenridge grew into a proper town with churches and schools and even a small opera house. The silver boom eventually went bust, but the town survived, transitioning into a place that served ranchers and farmers as well as the few remaining miners. William and Lydia would go down for supplies and social occasions, but they always returned to their mountain home with relief, glad to be back in the quiet and the clean air. William's hair went fully gray, then white, but he remained strong and vital well into his 60s. Lydia's dark hair showed only a few silver threads, and she remained as capable and hard-working as ever. They had built something extraordinary together, not just the physical structures of cabins and barns and fences, but a family, a community, a legacy. On their 30th wedding anniversary in 1907, their children and grandchildren gathered at the original cabin for a celebration. There were more than 20 people now in their immediate family, with more on the way. They roasted a deer and made pies and told stories late into the summer evening. As the younger children were put to bed and the adults settled into quieter conversation, William took Lydia's hand and led her away from the group, up the familiar path to their high meadow. The moon was nearly full, and they could see the path clearly even in the darkness. "Do you remember the first time I brought you up here?" William asked as they sat on their rock in the spot that had become sacred to them over the decades. "Of course, I remember everything about our life together. Every moment has been precious. Even the hard times. The winter little Edmund had pneumonia and we thought we would lose him. The year the early frost killed the garden and we barely had enough food. When that bear got into the cabin and we lost half our supplies. Even those," Lydia said firmly. "Maybe especially those, because we got through them together. We were never alone in our struggles. That is what makes all the difference." William lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture he had made thousands of times over their years together, but which still made her heart flutter. "I want you to know that marrying you was the best decision I ever made. You took a lonely, bitter mountain man and taught him how to live again, how to love again. You gave me a family and a purpose and a reason to be grateful every single day." "You did the same for me," Lydia replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I was lost and alone, trying so hard to be strong when I felt like I was breaking apart. You saw me, really saw me, and you offered me not just protection, but partnership. You never tried to change who I was, but you helped me become more myself than I had ever been." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moonlight on the mountains, listening to the distant sound of their family talking and laughing below. Eventually, Lydia leaned her head against William's broad shoulder, and his arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "Do you remember what you said the first time I took my hair down?" Lydia asked softly. "I said it was beautiful, that you should wear it down more often. You changed my life with that gesture. Such a small thing, really, but it made me realize that I had spent so much time trying to follow rules and be proper that I had forgotten how to just be myself. You gave me permission to let go of all that, to be free." William pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his fingers finding their way into her hair, which was still long though now more silver than brown. "You were always free, sweetheart. You just needed someone to remind you." They made their way back down to the cabin eventually, rejoining their family. The party went on until late, and when finally everyone had settled down to sleep, scattered throughout the various cabins and in bedrolls outside, William and Lydia lay together in their bed, the same bed they had shared for 30 years. "I am the luckiest man alive," William murmured in the darkness. "I am the luckiest woman," Lydia replied. "Oh, I love you. I love you too. Always." They fell asleep holding each other, as they had almost every night for 3 decades, secure in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful and lasting together. William and Lydia lived many more years in their mountain home, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They saw grandchildren become adults and have children of their own. They saw the world change around them, with automobiles and telephones and all manner of modern conveniences reaching even into the mountains, though they themselves remained content with their simpler life. When William finally passed, it was peacefully, at the age of 78, sitting in his favorite chair by the fire while Lydia read aloud to him from one of the books they both loved. He simply closed his eyes and did not open them again. Lydia held his hand and wept, mourning the loss of her partner and the love of her life, but also grateful for all the years they had been given together. She lived 5 more years after William's death, remaining in the mountain cabin surrounded by family. Her children and grandchildren took turns staying with her, making sure she was never alone unless she wanted to be. She spent her days tending her garden, sewing clothes for the newest great-grandchildren, and telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. Lydia passed in her sleep on a warm summer night, with her hair spread loose on her pillow the way William had always loved it. Her family buried her beside William in the small cemetery they had established on the hillside above the original cabin, under the aspens where the wildflowers grew thick every spring. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, her children had carved a simple inscription that captured the essence of who she had been and what her life had meant. She was brave, she was loved, and she was free. The cabins William and Lydia had built remained standing for generations, becoming a homestead that was passed down through the family. Their descendants continued to live in the high country, maintaining the traditions and values that William and Lydia had established. The story of how they met and fell in love became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. They spoke of the mountain man who had seen a lost young woman and offered her not just protection, but a partnership built on respect and equality. They spoke of the brave woman who had lost everything but found the courage to start over, to take a chance on love with a stranger who became the great love of her life. They spoke of the first time she had worn her hair loose, and how he had called it beautiful, and how that small moment of intimacy and acceptance had represented everything their marriage would become. It was a love story forged in the wild mountains of Colorado Territory, tempered by hardship and isolation, but ultimately stronger than anything that tried to break it. It was a love that had created a family, a community, and a legacy that lasted long after both William and Lydia had returned to the earth. And in the quiet moments, when the wind whispered through the pines and the aspens, when the wildflowers bloomed in riotous color across the high meadows, when the mountains turned gold in the setting sun, it was almost possible to see them there still, a tall, strong man with gray hair and gentle hands, and a woman with hair like a dark river, walking together through the wilderness they had made into a home, their love as enduring and beautiful as the mountains themselves.